Now, the main source of American power is its ability to control sea lanes, okay? Because it has military bases all around the world, okay? So in the red, these are all areas with US bases. And before, it used these US bases in order to maintain global trade. But with nations choosing to opt out of your system, now your strategy is to blockade them, right? Create a naval blockade, starve them of resources, which forces them to come beg to you for trade access, okay? So we've gone from a strategy where America guaranteed global trade to America basically being a mafia state, being pirates, and allowing you to use sea lanes and giving you trade access. Okay, does that make sense? And believe it or not, but America does not actually need to do that much work in order to control trade around the world. It just needs to control certain trade or certain choke points, okay? So the Panama Canal is one choke point, and that's why about a third of America's Navy is deployed to the Caribbean right now, all right? And its main purpose is to block off trade in the Western Hemisphere. So if you are China, if you are Japan, and you are South Korea, if you want to access Western resources, Western Hemisphere resources, you need the permission from the US government. And the example, of course, is Venezuela, where they removed the president, and now they basically have a blockade over Venezuela, and so the Venezuelan government is very cooperative, okay? They're basically very obedient. And so what we can expect next is for Trump to exert authority over Greenland. Why? Because this is the Arctic choke point, okay? Which gives you access to Canada and to Europe as well. We can also expect America to basically create a choke point over the Strait of Hormuz, right? So right now, the issue is that the Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz, but the Americans can also choose to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, does that make sense? All right. The major choke point in the world, of course, is something called the Strait of Malacca. Why? Because this is where China gets most of its resources from Africa, from the Middle East, okay? Through this very small choke point. And again, unfortunately, there are lots of US military bases in this area. So as long as America is able to maintain these three major choke points, the Panama Canal, the Middle East, and the Strait of Malacca, and also, Greenland as well, then America can control naval access, okay? Trade access, maritime navigation. It can control all these things. And so what's gonna happen is this. The big event this year, moving forward, is that Russia will militarize its shadow fleet. Okay? Basically, Russia has a shadow fleet of about 1,000 ships. It will provide mercenaries to these ships, and then it will start to engage America in the oceans. The point is not to defeat the American Navy. You can't do that, okay? The point is to create a war of attrition, where you know that the Americans will have problems rebuilding these ships. And these ships are pretty old as well. And the sailors on them are pretty tired. So you just force them into conflict, and then this naval capacity of the United States will degrade over time, okay? So this is something to look out for over the next year or 2 years. This conflict in the seas that will arise between Russia and the United States, okay? And then you ask yourself, okay, well, how about China? Because China is actually the main beneficiary of oceanic trade. And China is going to do China, which is to say that China is going to try to negotiate between Russia and America and try to triangulate the two and try to come to peace with all two, okay? And that often means paying both off, paying both the Russians and paying the Americans off. And that's what happened in May when Trump visits China, right? Okay, we'll talk more about that later on. Okay. So the big news this weekend, and this is something I want to focus on for the rest of the lecture, is the Americans said that one of their jets, called an F-15, this is about a $90 million plane, okay? It was shot down over Iran, okay? Basically in this area right here. And you ask yourself, okay, the Americans have air supremacy over Iran, so how is it possible for the Iranians to shoot down a plane? And the answer is this. The US Air Force is not designed to fight a long war. It's designed to fight at most a 2-week war. If you fight for too long, you have certain issues. One issue is maintenance, okay? Which is, these are very expensive planes. They require a lot of maintenance. But if they're flying too much, if they have too much work, they suffer from wear and tear, okay? Another issue is just fatigue, where these pilots are being asked to work too hard, they get tired, they get lazy. Now, the last thing is this, Iranian resilience. Okay, and all this means is that as you're bombing the Iranians have to figure out how to strike back at you. Their radar systems don't really work, so what they use is heat-seeking missiles. Okay? So rather than try to figure out where you are, they just fly missiles up in the air and hope to lock onto your heat signature and knock you down, okay? All right, so over time, all this means is that as this war progresses, if you insist on fighting an air war, you're gonna lose more and more planes. As your pilots get tired, as maintenance issues arise, as the Iranians become much more creative in their response, okay? So a pilot was shot down and 2 pilots were able to eject safely out of their plane. Now, it is the policy of the American military to leave no man behind. And this is the Americans are one of the few militaries actually do this, where if you're behind enemy lines, they will try to rescue you. And they spent years training you on how to evade enemy captors. They'll spend a lot of resources trying to save you. And the propaganda is that this is to show you how Americans really value human life. And it's something that Americans are very proud of. But another reason why the Americans do this is this optics, which is that the Americans believe that the military is invincible. And they spend a lot of money and resources in order to create this image, this aura of invincibility and invisibility. So if the Iranians are able to capture a pilot and have him appear on Iranian TV, this is a huge propaganda win for the Iranians. Meaning that if the Americans will try your best, the Americans will try their best to save you, but if they can't save you and there's a risk that the enemy will capture you, they'd rather have you killed. Okay? Because they can't afford to lose this propaganda war. For the Americans, everything is optics. And as I'll show you later on, this is going to be a huge issue in this war, okay, as this war progresses. Now, there are a lot of issues with the story that's being told to us, okay? So Americans said that they have successfully evacuated both pilots, they have saved both pilots. But the issue is this. The issue is that we know that the Americans created a makeshift landing strip, basically an airport, a small airport, 200 kilometers from where the airman actually was knocked down. So he had to hike a long way in order to get to the landing strip. Also, he was injured. I think he broke his ankle or something, okay? So that was very, very hard to do. Also, he's trying to evade enemy capture. Okay, so this story doesn't really make sense. And why did the Americans decide to create a landing strip here rather than someplace closer? And why would you need 155 planes for this operation, right? Aren't you better off with just 1 or 2 to like avoid enemy fire? So this is a very strange story. But it gets weirder, okay? It turns out that the Americans basically spent a lot of resources to save the pilot. It took 48 hours, and the CIA created a lot of distractions. And the Americans spent a lot of resources to save the man. while the Iranians were trying to capture him, okay? And this led to the destruction of very expensive American planes. Okay, these are called C-130, so they're transport planes. And they were destroyed in the rescue operation.